Have you ever watched someone calmly take injustice and turn it into a movement? She didn't shout. She didn't protest in the aisle. She just stood there, black, dignified, and denied her seat. The seat she paid for, the seat she earned, and the seat a white man was quietly given in her place. But what the crew didn't know, what the passengers didn't see coming, was who she really was. Not just a passenger, not just a CEO, but a woman who owned part of the very airline that humiliated her. Why did the crew ignore her ticket? What power did she carry in silence, and how did her response lead to an entire flight crew losing their jobs and the aviation world rewriting its rules? This is not just a story about a flight. It's a story about presence, about quiet power, and about a gate that opened for everyone because one woman refused to sit in the wrong seat ever again. So, if you believe in justice, dignity, and stories that shift the sky, like, share, and subscribe because you're about to board a story you'll never forget. Let's begin. The cabin was quiet. Not silent, just polite. The kind of hush that settles over early morning flights where people are too tired to talk but too alert to sleep. Boarding was nearly complete. The last few passengers were stowing bags, settling in, adjusting seat belts. Evelyn Cross had already taken her seat. Row 4, Seat A, window, business class. She sat with her shoulders relaxed, a soft cream suit folded naturally over her frame, her tote leather, worn at the corners, but unmistakably handcrafted, rested beneath the seat in front of her. She had an old iPhone with a spiderweb crack across the top corner, and no case, just clean lines and a locked screen. She wasn't scrolling, she was watching, through the oval window. The tarmac at Phoenix Skyport gleamed under soft morning sun. A luggage cart whirred by. A line of airport crew stood beside the service truck, laughing about something she couldn't hear. She glanced down at her boarding pass. Printed, not digital. The ink had smudged slightly at the edge. It still read clearly, Flight 3042 Seat 4A, name Evelyn M. Cross status, priority, elite. She tucked it into the inner pocket of her blazer and breathed deeply, letting the hum of the aircraft settle her nerves. She wasn't nervous because of the flight. She was nervous because something always went wrong when she flew. But today, she told herself, would be different, until it wasn't. Ma'am. The voice came from the aisle. Firm, too loud, too sure of itself. Evelyn turned her head slowly. A man in a navy blazer stood just inches from her armrest. He wore an airline badge clipped to his chest and a tight smile that didn't reach his eyes. "Ma'am, I'm going to need you to come with me," he said. The volume of his voice made a few heads turn. A woman across the aisle in 4C looked over. A man, 2 rows back, peeked up from his tablet. Evelyn blinked once, then raised an eyebrow. "Excuse me," she asked softly. Her voice wasn't loud, but it carried. "I'm sorry, there's been a change. You'll be relocated to another seat," the man said. He didn't look sorry. He didn't look curious. He looked like someone delivering news that had already been decided. Evelyn sat still. "This seat," she said, touching the armrest lightly, "was assigned to me at booking, under corporate priority. It's on my pass." She reached calmly into her pocket and unfolded the paper, placed it on the armrest like an offering. The man didn't look down, not even once. Instead, he stepped back. "There's been a reassignment," he repeated. "Please follow me. You'll be seated in the main cabin." The air grew colder. The cabin didn't go silent, but it tightened. Subtle movement stopped. The woman in 4C froze mid-sip of her coffee. A young couple across the aisle shifted in their seats. Someone quietly pressed record on their phone. Evelyn's heart beat faster, but her hands didn't move. She knew what this was. Not a mistake, not a system error, just the kind of decision that came down quietly through invisible channels. The kind of decision that said, "You don't belong here." Her fingers closed gently around her boarding pass. Then she stood, not fast, not flustered, just steady, and the shift was almost imperceptible. Except it wasn't. You could feel it ripple across the rows. The man didn't say another word. He simply turned and walked. Evelyn followed. She passed rows of eyes pretending not to stare. One or two passengers gave her that sympathetic look, the kind that said, "I see you, but I'm not getting involved." She reached row 23, seat D, middle. She slid into it without comment. The man standing in the aisle next to her was young, probably early 20s, white, hoodie pulled low over his brow. He stepped aside quickly, avoiding eye contact. Then, as she buckled her belt, he turned and whispered, "Ma'am, that wasn't right. I'm sorry." Evelyn didn't respond. She just looked forward. Then she pulled out her phone, unlocked it. No contacts. Just a single letter on the screen. She tapped it. The phone rang once, then connected. "I'll be arriving behind schedule," she said. Her voice was even, calm. "Activate Clause B. Confirm time and record." Then she hung up. Across the aisle, a woman holding a baby glanced over, then looked away fast. 3 rows ahead, a girl in college sweatshirt black, early 20s leaned toward her friend and whispered, "I swear I've seen her before," who her friend asked. The girl didn't answer. She just started typing into her phone. Behind them, a teenager pulled out his own device, started live streaming, captioned "Black woman removed from business class seat." No explanation, no apology. Hashtag Skybridge flight 3042 viewers 58 and rising. Evelyn didn't look back, didn't speak. She reached into her tote, pulled out a slim leather folio, clicked a pen, began to write. In the front of the plane, the man who had taken her seat, white, mid-40s, wearing a golf watch and a smug smile, sipped sparkling water like it had always been his. He didn't look back. He didn't need to. But Evelyn Cross wasn't done. Not by a long shot. The plane hadn't even left the ground, and she had already made a decision. By the time the aircraft lifted from the tarmac, the hush inside had settled into something heavier. It wasn't quiet in the peaceful sense. It was the kind of quiet that made you lean in, that prickled at the back of your neck. The kind that said something had happened, even if no one dared name it yet. Evelyn Cross sat still in 23D, hands folded, pen resting lightly across her palm. Her seat was firm, narrower than it should have been. The man beside her was too large for his own space and kept adjusting himself without apology. She didn't flinch. She didn't move. She simply centered her body and leaned back, not for comfort, but for calm. Above her, the cabin lights dimmed. Rows ahead, amber-tinted service trays began their slow shuffle down the aisle. Flight attendants moved like shadows, but every few seconds, one of them glanced back, not toward the cockpit, toward her. Amber Lee, the younger of the two assigned to cabin service that morning, was fidgeting with a stack of cups near the beverage cart. She whispered under her breath. "I didn't know," she said. Her voice cracked. Raquel Dimas, the senior attendant with silvering roots tucked neatly under her cap, didn't respond at first. She pressed the water jug closer to the edge, double-checking for balance. "You saw the boarding pass," Amber continued. She had it in her hand. "And Marcus just—" Raquel finally looked at her, eyes sharp but tired. "Keep your voice down," she said. Amber shook her head. "We just bumped a black woman from business class with no cause, no explanation, and she didn't even argue." "That's the part that scares me," Raquel said. Amber blinked. "Because people who stay calm like that, they're not defeated. They're calculating." In seat 18A, Layla Bryant was trying to breathe normally. She wore a Navy Skybridge Airlines blazer that wasn't technically hers yet. She was interning through a regional diversity pipeline, working toward a role in operations support. Her supervisor had told her to observe, to learn. But she hadn't meant this. She'd seen it happen, all of it. She had watched Evelyn stand without protest, watched Marcus Kane not even glance at her boarding pass, watched her walk down the aisle like it was nothing. But it wasn't nothing. Layla could still hear the sound of Evelyn's shoes, low heels, unhurried, certain. She opened her phone under the tray table and typed, "Evelyn Cross." 3 names popped up immediately. One photo caught her breath. The same woman, cream suit, candid shot, Forbes profile banner, Evelyn M. Cross, founder and CEO of Solaris Equity Group, net worth undisclosed, silent partner in multiple airline contracts, including Skybridge's own fleet transition last year. Layla looked up. Evelyn was just sitting there, back straight, eyes half closed, calm in a way that felt rehearsed. Not the performance kind. The survival kind, Layla whispered to herself. They don't know who they just displaced. At the very rear of the plane, Kendrick Hale was still streaming. TikTok handle, Our Real Talk Aviation Viewers, 6483 comments flying up the screen. "She's someone. I know it. OMG, this bout to go viral." She didn't even raise her voice. Kendrick leaned closer to his mic. "She's not back here because of a seat mix-up. They bumped her for some white dude. I saw it. Everyone saw it. And she just made a call. Y'all think this is over. Nah, this just started. At the front of the plane. The man now sitting in 4A sipped his second sparkling water. Tyler Ross was already halfway through a work email, typing with one hand, scanning his inbox with the other. He hadn't paid much attention to the woman who left, barely noticed the way the boarding pass lingered on the armrest. He had arrived late, the way men like him always seemed to, and assumed things would simply arrange themselves around him. They had. But something about the mood in business class had shifted. The woman in 4C wasn't reading anymore. She was whispering to the man beside her. She didn't say anything, just left. She had the seat, her companion murmured. "I saw it, so did he," she said, glancing toward Tyler. He didn't look up. He didn't need to, but 2 rows behind him, Raquel's radio buzzed. She turned her back toward the aisle and listened. The voice came through crackly and low. "Manifest alert, passenger 4A mismatch, tier flag on file." Raquel froze. "Repeat," she said into her mic. "Passenger 4A mismatch. Passenger of interest is actually in 23D. Tier status confirmed. Do not engage." Raquel turned to Amber. "She's tier 0. Amber frowned. "What's that mean?" Raquel stared forward, then whispered. "It means she signs the checks." In 23D, Evelyn clicked her pen twice, and then stopped. She wasn't angry. She wasn't even surprised. She had been here before. Not this row, not this airline, but this space, The one where people assume things, where your silence is read as absence, where calm is mistaken for compliance, where having the right doesn't mean they'll respect it. Her thoughts circled like the plane above Arizona cloud cover. She thought of the interns she mentored, the boardroom she had just left the day before. The younger version of herself she carried around like a folded letter. She thought of Layla, though she didn't know her name yet. She thought of Amber and Raquel and wondered who, if any, would remember this moment after the headlines faded. And she thought of her father. His voice still lived in the spaces between her decisions. You don't have to raise your voice, baby. Just raise your standard. She adjusted her seatbelt. A new ping sounded. This one came from the front of the aircraft. Marcus Kane, who had returned to the galley, pulled out his work-issued tablet. He typed in a few keys, pulled up the manifest. When the name Evelyn M. Cross appeared in red with an advisory override and the words, "Do not interact," he went pale. Then his phone vibrated. Direct line, corporate relations. He answered, already sweating. "Yes," he said. The voice on the other end didn't waste time. "Did you knowingly reassign a Tier 0 passenger seat?" Marcus hesitated. She didn't look like he stopped himself. The voice cut him off. "She's a controlling stakeholder. You'll be instructed upon landing. Do not approach her again. Do not make eye contact. You're already under review." The call ended. Marcus stood frozen in place. In row 23, Evelyn wrote one more word in her folio. Witnessed. Tyler Ross hadn't even noticed the shift. Not really. He had boarded late, waved casually at the attendants, and settled into 4A like it had always been his. His carry-on luggage fit too easily in the overhead bin, and when he sat down, his sport coat barely wrinkled. He asked for a sparkling water with lime before the cart had even begun moving. Confidence wrapped around him like cologne, thick, synthetic, and loud. He glanced to his left at the empty seat beside him. 4B, then checked his watch. Expensive, bulky, the kind that implied leisure, not labor. His thumbs danced across his phone screen. Emails, deals, a spreadsheet he wasn't really reading. He didn't think about the woman who had been there before him. He barely noticed the way some passengers looked at him as he walked in. If he had noticed, he would have assumed it was admiration, maybe envy. Never consequence. In 23D, Evelyn Cross did not look back. She didn't have to. The man in her seat wasn't the problem. He was a symptom. She had seen his type 100 times before. In boardrooms, on golf courses, at charity galas where people congratulated themselves for caring. The type of man who arrived late and expected space to be made for him. The type who didn't question how things fell into place because they always had. What Evelyn thought about now was not him, but the silence that followed her, the stares, the faces that flickered with discomfort but not conviction. She thought about how many people had looked away. Even now, the hush hadn't lifted. Not really. It had just changed rooms. Across the aisle, the woman with the baby glanced toward Evelyn again. Her baby was sleeping now. She wasn't. Her eyes were wide, watching. A few rows ahead. Layla Bryant was still scrolling her phone under the tray. She had found 3 different profiles on Evelyn Cross. One was from a black-owned media outlet, one from a corporate investment ranking site, and one a lengthy feature in Forbes described Evelyn as a silent force behind major transportation mergers, including, Layla now realized, Skybridge's own fleet expansion last year. She was more than a shareholder. She was the checkbook. Layla swallowed hard. Her palms were sweating. She knew enough about company structure to understand what was happening. The passenger, now seated in 23D, had been removed from a seat she bought for a man who simply looked like he belonged, and no one stopped it, even her. Layla pressed her fingers against her temple. She should have said something, or at least walked away when she saw it happen, but she hadn't. And that shame was now sitting right beside her, heavier than any carry-on. In the front of the cabin, Marcus Kane was pacing. He kept tapping his tablet, as if refreshing the manifest would somehow clear the alert. It didn't. Evelyn Cross, flagged, Tier 0, partner account status. It didn't even have her photo attached, because it didn't need one. The system didn't care how she looked, only who she was. And now, everyone else would know too. He pulled his phone from his pocket again. No new messages. He was waiting for corporate to tell him what to do, but no one was calling. No one wanted to touch it now. This was the kind of mistake that stuck to your shoes, no matter how clean you tried to walk. Amber appeared at the galley curtain. Her face was pale. "She's just sitting there," she whispered. "She hasn't said a word. But people are watching her. Some of them have phones out." Marcus rubbed his eyes. "Don't engage." Raquel stepped in behind Amber. Her jaw was clenched. "She's writing in a notebook," she said, and she doesn't look angry. She looks done. In 18A, Layla typed something into her notes app, line by line, like she was building a record. She knew this moment would matter later, not because it would go viral, but because it would become one of those stories people told in training videos, in HR workshops, in legal memos, the kind that made companies uncomfortable, but only after someone powerful made them look. Layla leaned toward the girl next to her. "I know who she is." Who, the girl asked. "Evelyn Cross. She runs Solaris. They basically bankroll Skybridge." "No way," the girl whispered. "I'm serious. That seat she was in. She probably funded the aircraft it's bolted to." In the back of the plane, Kendrick Hale was reading chat comments as they scrolled past his screen. Now at 8,900 viewers. Someone typed, "She's the reason this airline didn't go bankrupt last year." Another, "Damn, they kicked the owner out of her own seat." Kendrick zoomed in slowly on row 23. He didn't say anything. He just let the silence tell the story. At 30,000 feet, Evelyn opened her folio. Inside was a copy of the shareholder agreement she had signed just under a year ago. She had reviewed it many times. Section 8C stood out now. Clause 8C. In the event of publicly witnessed discriminatory action involving a Tier 0 stakeholder, Solaris Equity retains full right to enforce emergency compliance intervention within 48 hours. She tapped her pen gently against the paper. Then she wrote, "Document incident, record timelines, notify board upon landing, up front." Tyler Ross finally noticed the shift in the air. It wasn't turbulence. It was something more subtle, a change in attention, a ripple of glances. He lowered his phone and turned to the woman beside him. "Is something going on?" She looked at him for a moment, then said, "Yes. And you're sitting in it?" Tyler frowned. What's that supposed to mean? But she was already turning away. Raquel's earpiece buzzed again. This time, it was ground control. A new alert, Level 1 intervention flag, passenger 23D, confirmed status. The voice crackled. Raquel whispered into her mic, "Tier 0, seated in economy. Unauthorized reassignment by crew supervisor Marcus Kane. The voice didn't respond immediately. Then, prepare for executive arrival on ground. Do not attempt passenger movement. In 23D. Evelyn clicked her pen again, then closed the folio. Her eyes were tired, but steady. She didn't know how many people were watching now. She didn't need to. Power was not about volume, it was about direction. And Evelyn Cross had already decided where this flight was headed. The captain didn't like being interrupted mid-cruise. Captain Rowan Turner was a man of habit, trained by routine, measured by the hour. His rituals were everything. From the double check of the throttle to the exact time he removed his gloves at 27,000 feet. Everything had a place, a reason. But this message was different. The internal comms light blinked red, not amber, not yellow, red. It was the kind of message he hadn't seen since the lockdown years, since VIP evacuations and high-level clearances. Tier 0. Passenger located in 23D. Immediate advisory intervention. Captain Rowan's hand froze over the flight log. He turned to his co-pilot, a younger man still fresh from regional command. "Check the manifest," he said quietly. The co-pilot tapped through the interface, then stopped. His eyebrows rose slightly. Evelyn Cross, he read, seated in business class originally, reassigned by crew. Rowan leaned in. Tier 0 flagged. They both stared at the screen. "You ever heard of Tier 0?" the co-pilot asked. Rowan shook his head once. "No, but it sounds like someone we shouldn't be bumping." Down in the cabin, the air had changed again. It wasn't obvious. No one screamed. No turbulence. No calls for help. But the tension was rising like cabin pressure unchecked. In 23D, Evelyn sat unmoving, eyes gently closed, not sleeping, not resting, centering, like a swimmer below the surface, preserving breath, not yet breaking the water. A few rows up, Layla Bryant could barely hold still. She had just received a text from her mentor back at headquarters. 2 words. "She's real." Layla knew exactly what that meant. She leaned forward to whisper to the girl next to her again. "She's not just rich, she's powerful. That woman owns part of the airline." Her friend turned her head slowly, and they bumped her for that guy. Layla nodded. From the corner of her eye, she noticed Evelyn open her eyes and look out the window again. She wasn't listening, but she didn't need to be. Evelyn had spent years learning how to read rooms without sound. She knew when people were shifting in their seats. She knew what it meant when the air got still in the wrong way. She picked up her phone, tapped once, then again. A contact marked Legal B. Then she spoke, low and clear. "Yes, it happened. Same procedure. I need the footage pulled on arrival. Contact counsel. Tag Contract Clause 8 and alert compliance. I'll notify them in person." Then she hung up. She didn't wait for questions. She never needed confirmation when she already knew the answer. Up front, Tyler Ross was starting to sweat. He hadn't noticed before, but now he was very aware of how people were glancing in his direction. It wasn't hostile, not yet, just curious, like someone trying to figure out what side of the story he was on. He looked to his right. The woman in 4C wasn't even pretending to hide her stare anymore. What he asked, defensive. She didn't answer, because she didn't need to. He looked down at his drink, then out the window, then back at the aisle. "Finally," he whispered. "She gave up the seat, didn't she?" The woman replied, "No, they took it, And then she went back to her magazine, though she wasn't really reading, in the galley. Marcus Kane was gripping the edge of the counter so hard his knuckles went white. He had received the same Tier 0 message on his own device 5 minutes earlier. Now he was just standing there. He had messed up. Badly. He was hoping stupidly that maybe the passenger didn't want to escalate, that maybe she'd just take it quietly, like so many others had before her, that maybe the moment would pass like turbulence, forgotten once they hit the ground. But deep down, he knew Evelyn Cross wasn't the kind of woman who let things pass. He turned toward Raquel and Amber, who had both returned to the galley for water service. "We have to fix this," he said under his breath. Amber looked at him like he'd just told her the sun was cold. "Fix it," she echoed. "We can't even look her in the eye." Raquel didn't speak. Her jaw was clenched tight. She was old enough to know what this meant, what it always meant, and she had stayed silent when it happened. That silence would cost her. In 23D, Evelyn reopened her folio. This time, she wasn't writing notes. She was reviewing 3 pages of incident procedures, clause references, fleet funding stipulations. Her handwriting was clean, even deliberate. Across the aisle, the woman with the baby leaned over, hesitation in her voice. "Excuse me, ma'am, I don't mean to bother you, but are you okay? Do you need anything?" "Water." Evelyn looked at her. Her expression softened. She smiled, not polite, not performative, just real. "No, sweetheart," she said gently. "They'll be bringing more than water soon enough." The woman blinked, then nodded slowly. From the rear of the plane, Kendrick Hale was whispering to his stream. "She just said it. Y'all heard that, right? They'll be bringing more than water." "Man, she's cooking something back there." Comments exploded. This about to be bigger than Delta. "Who is she? Yo, someone find her name quick in 18A. Layla tapped again, searched LinkedIn, found Evelyn's professional profile, posted it to her own story with the caption, "They didn't just remove a passenger, they removed a partner." Inside the cockpit, Captain Rowan received one final comms message. A new line of text blinked on the screen. "Do not deplane passenger in 23D. Wait for executive instructions." He turned to the co-pilot. "Mark our ETA. Notify gate control." "Something's coming." "No." "Someone." Back in the cabin, Evelyn placed her folio back in her tote. She leaned into her seat, took a single, long breath, and then closed her eyes, not to sleep, but to prepare. Because the altitude had changed, and the real descent was just beginning. The chime sounded, that soft, familiar tone, the one that usually meant nothing, a simple seatbelt sign, a friendly reminder, a cue for people to wake up gently, prepare for descent, put their tray tables away. But this time, the sound felt different. It wasn't just a notification, it was a signal. Evelyn Cross opened her eyes slowly. She didn't look startled. She looked ready, like a musician who had waited through the silence just long enough to know when the downbeat would fall. Outside, the clouds had thinned. The plane was beginning its final approach toward Logan International. The light was sharp now, breaking across the sky like a question that refused to be ignored. A few rows up, Layla Bryant checked the flight app. Arrival time 11:42 a.m., Gate B3. She glanced back toward Evelyn and then looked away quickly, embarrassed at being caught staring, though Evelyn hadn't looked her way. Still, something about the older woman's composure made Layla sit a little straighter in her own seat. Back in 23D, Evelyn placed her phone on her lap. She didn't touch it. She didn't need to. Everything that needed to be set in motion had already begun. Calls had been made, contracts flagged, names marked. Now it was just a matter of gravity and timing. Across the aisle, the woman with the baby whispered something to her child, though the infant was still asleep. Her voice cracked as she did, because she could feel it too. Something was coming. From the cockpit. Captain Rowan Turner placed the headset down for a moment. He ran a hand across his face and let out a breath. "We're being instructed to hold passengers on board after landing," he said to his co-pilot. "That's not protocol." "No," Rowan replied, "but this isn't a protocol situation." In the galley, Marcus Kane leaned against the wall. He had stopped checking his phone. The silence from corporate told him everything. They weren't coming to help. They were coming to watch. Amber Lee was pretending to organize napkins, but her hands were trembling. Every few seconds she glanced toward the cabin, expecting someone to approach Evelyn, say something, maybe offer water or a towel. No one had. She whispered to Raquel. "Do we say anything before landing?" Raquel shook her head. "No, it's too late for talking. Now we wait." Amber's eyes welled. "I didn't mean to hurt her. I just followed orders." Raquel replied, "So did a lot of people in history." The words landed like weight. In business class, Tyler Ross had put his phone away. His leg bounced now, tapping lightly against the seat. He had noticed the whispers, the way people stopped looking at him and started looking past him, as if he had moved from center to background in a single blink. The woman beside him finally leaned in. "You feel it yet?" He swallowed. "I don't understand what I did." "You didn't have to," she replied. Then she turned back to her book, leaving him alone with a discomfort he had never felt before. From the rear of the plane, Kendrick Hale's live stream was now at 13,200 viewers. He zoomed in on Evelyn from behind, framing her perfectly from between the seats. The comments were pouring in faster than he could read them. "She's unreal. She's about to shut the whole company down. This the calmest takedown in aviation history." Kendrick spoke quietly into his mic. "She still hasn't said anything to the crew. Not once. But I swear it feels like the whole plane's listening to her." He wasn't wrong. In 18A, Layla was reading a LinkedIn article she had just found. It was an interview with Evelyn from 3 years ago. The headline, "Power Doesn't Always Announce Itself." Layla reread a single quote over and over again. "I don't carry power to remind people I have it. I carry it so the next woman won't have to beg for her seat." She looked back again. Evelyn had just placed her hand over her phone. Gently, like covering something sacred. She was still. Still as steel. Captain Rowan clicked the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, we've begun our descent into Boston. Please remain seated with your seat belts fastened. We'll be arriving shortly. Thank you." His voice was even, professional, but inside, his stomach churned. The legal team had confirmed that the passenger in 23D had initiated a governance clause. That meant everything they did from this point forward was being watched, logged, audited. He turned to his co-pilot. "We don't make another mistake today." The younger man nodded. Raquel was already preparing the final cabin check when her earpiece buzzed again. Executive gate security confirmed. Special escort ready at gate. "Do not move, passenger 23D without authorization." Raquel whispered back. "Understood." Amber looked at her. "Escort." Raquel didn't respond. Her face was unreadable, but inside she was already grieving what came next. In the center of the plane, Evelyn clicked her pen once. She flipped her folio open and wrote only one line. Final descent. System will be addressed. The man beside her glanced her way. He looked young, maybe 30. He hadn't spoken the entire flight, but now, tentatively, he leaned toward her. "I don't mean to pry, ma'am," he said softly, "but are you someone important?" Evelyn looked over. Her eyes were steady, but kind. "I'm just someone," she said, "who doesn't like being told where she doesn't belong." The man nodded slowly. He would never forget that answer. As the city skyline appeared through the windows and the plane began its final turn toward the runway, no one said much. The silence wasn't empty anymore. It was full of knowing, full of anticipation, full of the quiet before something happens that can't be undone. Evelyn Cross adjusted her jacket and waited for the wheels to touch down. The wheels touched down with a whisper and a bounce. Most landings felt the same to Evelyn Cross: a mild rumble, a short stretch of speed. Then the glide into place. But this one felt different. Not because of the landing itself, but because of what it meant. Everything had already begun before the plane kissed the runway. And now, gravity was catching up with everyone on board. Inside the cabin, no one moved, not a single person unbuckled, not one tray table clicked up, not one arm reached for the overhead bin, because everyone knew, somehow, without being told. They all felt it in their bones. This wasn't a normal arrival. This was a reckoning. In 23D, Evelyn remained still. She didn't reach for her bag. She didn't stand. She simply sat, hands gently clasped, looking straight ahead like someone waiting not for permission, but for protocol to catch up to her presence. The man beside her was silent too. He wasn't sure what he had just witnessed over the past 3 hours, but he knew enough to stay quiet, to respect the space around this woman like sacred ground. The baby 2 rows ahead began to cry softly. Even that sound felt cautious. Up in the cockpit, Captain Rowan Turner removed his headset slowly, like it had gained weight. He turned to his co-pilot. "We wait for word from the gate," he said. The younger man nodded but said nothing. Both of them knew this was far above their pay grade now. In the galley, Marcus Kane checked his phone again. Still nothing. No updates from corporate. No one picking up his calls. The last message he had received was 4 words: "Do not speak further." He was no longer in control, not of the crew, not of the situation, and certainly not of the narrative. Amber Lee leaned against the beverage cart, trying to keep her breathing even. She didn't want to cry again, not now, not when it would be seen as weakness, or worse, guilt. Raquel Demas adjusted the lapel of her uniform and stared straight ahead. Her thoughts were a tangle of regret, responsibility, and realism. She had seen many things in her career, but she had never seen a woman hold an entire aircraft silence in the palm of her hand without uttering a single threat. In 18A, Layla Bryant was already writing a draft email to herself. She titled it "What I Saw Today." She wanted to make sure she remembered every detail, not just for herself, but because stories like this had a habit of getting rewritten by people who never sat in row 23. She looked up just in time to see Evelyn click her pen once and slide it into her folio. Behind them, Kendrick Hale's live stream was still active. Viewer, count 17,200 and climbing. He was whispering now. They're not opening the doors. Flight attendants are frozen. This woman hasn't moved in 10 minutes and it feels like she's calling the whole show. Comments flowed in. Her calm is louder than a protest. She's running it from economy. I need to be like her when I grow up in business class. Tyler Ross had gone from fidgeting to fully sweating. He wiped his brow with the cocktail napkin he had earlier tossed aside. It didn't help. He could feel it now, the weight of something he couldn't name, the feeling of having taken something you didn't earn, and the knowledge that everyone around you saw it too. He looked over at the woman in 4C again. "I didn't know," he muttered. She raised an eyebrow. "You didn't care to," she said. Then she faced forward again. The chime rang, but not the regular one. This tone was sharper. It didn't come from the captain. It came from the aircraft's internal satellite comms, an emergency uplink channel used only by executive command. In the galley. Raquel's radio crackled. "Gate security online. Hold aircraft. Do not deplane passengers. Await VIP escort for passenger 23D. Raquel turned to Marcus slowly. "She's getting an escort." Marcus didn't respond. Because he couldn't speak without shaking, Layla looked toward the front of the cabin, then back toward Evelyn. The entire plane seemed to pivot around her, every unspoken question, every stare, every ounce of confusion or guilt or awe. It all traced back to her chair. And Evelyn. She simply adjusted her blazer sleeve. Calm, clean, exact, at the gate. The bridge operator received a notification that made her step back from her screen. A blinking message she had never seen before in 8 years on the job. "Hold all boarding bridges. Priority escort inbound." Another followed seconds later. "Do not remove passenger 23D without executive-level clearance. This is a governance-level intervention." She stared at the message, then again and again. Back on the aircraft, Captain Rowan received final confirmation. The message was short. "Do not release the cabin. VIP team en route. Passenger 23D is to remain undisturbed." He turned on the intercom. "Ladies and gentlemen, please remain in your seats. Due to an ongoing gate issue, we've been instructed to hold position for a few more minutes. We appreciate your patience." He clicked off the mic. Didn't say a word more. In 23D, Evelyn took a breath, measured, even. Then she pressed the call button above her. It lit up softly. A beat later, Raquel appeared at her side. "Yes, ma'am." Evelyn's voice was low, but her tone had changed. It carried something sharper now, something shaped by years of being dismissed and silenced. "Please inform your captain," she said evenly, "that he will be receiving a call in 5 minutes from the board of directors." Raquel blinked. Evelyn added, "You won't need to apologize, as long as you step aside when it happens." Raquel nodded slowly, then disappeared into the galley without another word. Amber followed her like a shadow, and the plane stayed frozen. Passengers holding phones, holding breath, holding silence. Somehow, the stillness was louder than anything. In 18A, Layla texted one sentence to her mentor. "She's not speaking often, but everyone else is trembling." The baby cried again, the cabin lights dimmed, and at 11:47 a.m., the jet bridge remained empty, waiting for her. The cabin door hadn't opened yet, but the air had already shifted, not just with pressure, with presence. A weight settled over every aisle and every row, the kind of stillness that arrives when something sacred or dangerous is about to happen. No one moved, not even the baby, as if the aircraft itself knew it was under observation now. The only sound was the distant whir of the jet bridge being extended. Then, footsteps, not many, just 3 sets, measured, calm, official. They didn't rush, they didn't speak, because they didn't have to. At the front of the plane, just beyond the threshold of the door, stood 3 individuals in dark, tailored clothing. The first was a woman in a navy pantsuit with a discreet ID badge clipped to her hip, Naomi Hart, Vice President of Equity and Partner Relations for Skybridge Airlines. Her expression was calm, but her jaw was taut. Beside her stood Greg Talbot, General Counsel. He held a folder under one arm like it might shield him from whatever came next. The third was silent, an executive security liaison, no badge, no expression, just there to observe and to witness. Inside the cabin, Captain Rowan Turner stood just past the cockpit curtain. His arms were stiff at his sides, his face unreadable. He looked toward row 23. She hadn't stood yet, but she would. Evelyn Cross unbuckled her seatbelt. The click echoed louder than it should have. She stood slowly, not for drama, just for certainty. Every eye followed her. She adjusted the sleeve of her blazer, picked up her folio, and reached beneath the seat to retrieve her leather tote. No fumbling, no rush. Then she began to walk, down the aisle that had earlier felt like exile, but now felt like a runway. A woman in row 21 lowered her gaze as Evelyn passed. A man in 19 whispered something inaudible to his partner. In 18A, Layla Bryant sat frozen, hands gripping the edge of her seat. She wanted to stand, to follow, to apologize, but she didn't move. Because this was Evelyn's walk, her moment, her power. As she neared the galley, Raquel Dimas stepped back instinctively. Amber Lee stood behind her, eyes red, her hands clutched at her waist like she was holding something fragile. Evelyn stopped beside them. She didn't sneer, she didn't gloat. She simply said, "You'll want to check your inbox when we land." Her tone wasn't cold, it was clear, and that clarity hit harder than any reprimand. She continued walking. Marcus Kane was the last person between her and the exit. He looked like a man headed for trial. His mouth opened, 1,000 excuses lined up behind his eyes. But Evelyn lifted one hand, palm outward, a single gesture, "Not now." And just like that, the words collapsed in his throat. She stepped past him, onto the jet bridge. Outside, the light was brighter than she expected. Evelyn paused for a breath. Then she faced Naomi, Greg, and the silent security liaison. Naomi was the first to speak. "Miss Cross," she began, voice smooth but tentative. "The board is assembled. They've asked if you prefer a remote briefing or I'll address them in person." Evelyn said. Greg cleared his throat. "Would you like transportation arranged?" "No, I have my own car," she replied. "But I'll need your internal flight logs, all communication records related to this aircraft, and video footage from the boarding gate through the cabin transition." Greg nodded quickly. "Of course." Evelyn turned slightly, eyes narrowing on him. "And I want full identification of all crew present, certification records, equity training compliance, everything." He nodded again. Slower this time. Behind them, the first passengers began deplaning, one by one. They walked past the silent confrontation at the jet bridge. No one asked questions. No one spoke. Even the usual thank you murmurs to the flight crew were absent. Everyone just moved quietly, like witnesses leaving a courtroom. Marcus stepped off last, his shoulders sagging. His badge had already been disabled. He knew it. He didn't need to test it. As he passed Evelyn, she didn't look at him. She didn't need to. Amber followed, cheeks blotched, hands still shaking. Raquel exited behind her, chin lifted, but her eyes dark with the weight of what she had allowed to happen. Evelyn turned back briefly. "You'll each receive official communication within the hour," she said. "I suggest you read it carefully before replying." Neither of them responded. Neither had to. The silence spoke for them. A man with an earpiece stepped forward. "Miss Cross, your vehicle is waiting. Direct to Manhattan. Police escort is on standby if needed." "Unnecessary," she replied. Then she paused, turned back toward the plane, toward the system that had doubted her worth the moment she stepped on board. Her voice was quiet but final. "And startin' today," she said to Naomi, "I'm the one giving the orders." Naomi swallowed hard. "Yes, Miss Cross." No one else spoke as Evelyn walked away. Her heels tapped softly against the concrete, but somehow they echoed louder than any announcement overhead. Inside the gate terminal, passengers lingered. Some stared out the windows. Others pulled up articles on their phones. Already the live stream had been clipped and shared. Already names were trending. And at the center of it all was one woman. Not with a mic, not with a podium, just a presence. One that could not be denied. Evelyn Cross didn't look back, because what lay ahead was already hers. The conference room at Skybridge Airlines Manhattan headquarters was made of glass and oak, high ceilings, frosted walls. It was designed to feel transparent. But everyone sitting around the long table knew better. This was where things got buried, or at least where they used to. Until today, the room was full. 10 board members sat rigidly in their leather chairs. One seat at the head remained empty. They waited, not with anticipation, but with tension, the kind that makes powerful people feel powerless, if only for a moment. The elevator outside chimed once. Footsteps approached. Evelyn Cross entered without ceremony. She did not pause, did not hesitate. She walked the full length of the table, the soft click of her shoes slicing through the silence. Her cream suit was perfectly pressed. Her folio tucked beneath her arm like a file carried into court. No one greeted her. No one dared to. She arrived at the head of the table, placed her folder down, then looked across the room. "Before we begin," she said, voice low and steady, "I will ask a single question." She paused, scanning the faces before her. Her gaze held weight, a gravity of lived experience, of rooms like this, of men like these. "Does anyone at this table believe my removal from seat 4A was due to a clerical error?" Silence, the kind that exposes everything. Evelyn waited. No one answered. Finally, she nodded. Good. She opened her folder and slid the first document across the table toward General Counsel. Shareholder Agreement, Section 9B, the Ownership Clause. The legal counsel leaned forward, eyes narrowing as he scanned the text. Solaris Equity currently owns 19.3% of Skybridge Airlines. That includes both direct shares and strategic placements. She placed a second document beside the first. This page outlines the contractual rights granted to any stakeholder with over 15% ownership in the event of a public incident involving discrimination or reputational harm. She didn't raise her voice. She didn't need to. Her words settled like dust on polished wood. "Yesterday," she continued, "I was publicly removed from a seat I lawfully held. There was no explanation, no apology, no effort to verify identity, and it was witnessed by over 100 passengers, many of whom were filming. Someone shifted in their chair. Evelyn tapped the folder once. Overlay that with this. She reached for a remote and tapped the center of the table. The monitor behind her flickered to life. A video played, muted but clear, security footage from the boarding gate. Evelyn handing her boarding pass to Marcus Kane, him not looking at it, waving her off. The slow procession down the aisle to seat 23D, another tap, a second video, phone footage from Kendrick's live stream, a split screen of Evelyn being asked to move, a white man seated in her place moments later, viewers in the tens of thousands. Then a spreadsheet appeared on screen. Fleet modernization contract, signed 6 months earlier. Line item, funding source. Solaris Equity Group, amount $287 million. Someone exhaled audibly. Evelyn turned. Now, ask yourselves, how does it look to your shareholders that you humiliated the woman who paid for your aircraft upgrade? A man 3 seats down cleared his throat. Miss Cross, surely this can be resolved. I'm not here to resolve, she interrupted. I'm here to restructure. The room went still again. Evelyn placed a flash drive onto the table. This contains a prepared resolution. If passed today, it allows Solaris Equity to appoint a temporary executive compliance officer with discretionary authority. A woman at the far end narrowed her eyes. You already picked someone, didn't you? Evelyn smiled faintly. Yes. There was no apology in her tone, only certainty. No one objected, not because they didn't want to, but because they couldn't. Naomi Hart finally spoke, her voice almost quiet. She owns the aircraft, and we treated her like a stowaway. Evelyn nodded. This isn't about apologies. It's about alignment. She paused. I'm not here to fight you. I'm here to make sure this never happens again. Not to me. Not to anyone who looks like me. She stepped back from the table slightly. The room sat taller because her presence demanded it. One by one, the board members voted, unanimous. The resolution passed. Evelyn reached for her folio. Effective immediately, she said. Marcus Kane is terminated for breach of protocol and equity violation. Greg Talbot scribbled notes furiously. Prepare HR documents, she added, and send official notices to flight attendants Amber Lee and Raquel Dimas. Include footage, internal review transcripts, reference policy codes. Naomi nodded. Evelyn looked at her directly. Prepare the internal staff memo as well. I'll give you the language myself. Greg raised a hand slightly, and the public statement. Evelyn didn't flinch. That comes next. She gathered her folder, but not from you. She paused. It comes from me. No one objected, because no one dared to stand in the way of someone who had built the table and now was claiming the seat at its head. Evelyn Cross turned and walked toward the door, each step a reminder that silence could speak volumes, and that sometimes the calmest person in the room is the one rewriting the rules. 2 days had passed. The airline still hadn't made an official statement, but the world already had. Clips of Evelyn's quiet presence on the plane had gone viral. Hashtags flooded every corner of social media. Interviews surfaced from former employees. Passengers posted stories of past discrimination they had never shared until now. Evelyn Cross didn't trend because she shouted. She trended because she didn't. She had shown people a different way to resist, one that was calm, unflinching, unmistakable, and as her story traveled further, It stopped being just hers. It became a symbol, a shift. Inside her office overlooking Bryant Park, Evelyn sat at her desk, reading through a handwritten letter. It had been mailed by a woman from Atlanta, 62 years old, a retired nurse. She had written 5 pages in looping script, describing how she had once been told to leave a first-class seat she paid for because she looked confused. She never filed a complaint. She had never told her children, until now. Evelyn folded the letter gently and placed it in a drawer labeled Voices. There were already over 40 inside, all handwritten, all personal, each one a reminder of what this moment meant, not just for her, but for everyone who had ever been asked to step aside for no reason other than who they were. Her assistant, Callie, knocked lightly and peeked in. "You've got Kendrick Hale on the line." Evelyn blinked, surprised, put him through. A few seconds later, his voice came through the speaker, still full of energy, but now with a hint of nervousness. "Hey, Miss Cross, it's Kendrick, from the flight." "I remember," she said with a smile. I wanted to say thank you. I know I didn't do much except film, but you did more than you realize." Evelyn cut in gently. "You gave the truth an audience." He fell quiet, then laughed awkwardly. "I guess so." "Yeah? Well, they're asking me to speak on a couple panels, aviation ethics, tech and real-time reporting, all that. I'm not sure I belong there." "You do," she replied without hesitation. "Speak clearly, stay grounded, and don't let anyone tell you the truth needs a title to matter." Kendrick exhaled. "I'll remember that." When the call ended, Evelyn sat for a moment in stillness, then turned to her calendar. 3 meetings lined up. 2 were internal restructuring reviews, but the third, circled in blue, was different. It was a meeting she had requested with Layla Bryant, the intern, the girl from 18A. She had seen something in that girl's eyes, not just recognition, but intention. At precisely 1:09 p.m., Layla arrived at the office. She wore a navy blazer 2 sizes too big and shoes that clicked nervously across the tile, but her eyes still sharp, still focused. Evelyn rose and greeted her with a smile. "Have a seat." Layla sat carefully, back straight, hands folded. "I appreciate you seeing me," she began. "I didn't expect it. Honestly, you're not just anything," Evelyn interrupted. "You were there, you noticed, and you took responsibility for what you saw. That matters." Layla nodded, unsure what to say. Evelyn continued. "I wanted to speak with you because I've reviewed your file. I see that you're interning through the Skybridge Diversity Pipeline." "Yes, ma'am," Layla replied quickly. "It's part of my senior thesis on corporate equity frameworks." "And do you believe in it?" Evelyn asked. "In the program, no. In the framework." Layla hesitated. "Honestly, not always. A lot of companies talk about equity because it sounds good, but I think most of them don't want to change. They want to look like they're changing." Evelyn smiled again. "That's why I requested your transfer." Layla blinked. "I'm sorry I've arranged for your internship to be moved," Evelyn said, sliding a folder across the desk. "To Solaris Equity Group. Effective immediately." Layla opened the folder with trembling fingers. Inside were onboarding forms, a welcome letter, a handwritten note from Evelyn herself. Tears stung at the corners of her eyes. "I don't know what to say." "Then don't," Evelyn said gently. "Just do the work." Layla nodded, and for the first time since the flight, she felt like she could breathe deeply. Later that evening, Evelyn walked through her neighborhood in Harlem. She often did this when the noise of the world grew too loud, not to escape it, but to remember where she came from, the corner bodega where she bought her first magazine about architecture. The mural near Lenox Avenue that featured women in head wraps and flight goggles. The old man who waved at her every Tuesday like clockwork, even though he never remembered her name. This was her grounding place, a reminder that power meant nothing if it didn't serve those without it. She stopped at a bench and sat. 2 children were playing with paper airplanes nearby, their laughter cutting through the dusk. She smiled because she knew this wasn't the end of a scandal. It was the beginning of a standard. The media lights were not what Evelyn Cross preferred. She had built her career in conference rooms, not press rooms. Her voice had always held weight without needing volume. Her influence was felt, not broadcast. But this time, silence would not suffice. She sat behind a simple table draped in navy blue. No flashy backdrops, no banners, just the emblem of Solaris Equity printed modestly in the corner. The room was filled to capacity. Reporters, analysts, airline execs, and young professionals squeezed together, notebooks out, eyes up, cameras rolled, microphones extended forward like vines searching for truth. Evelyn looked out over the sea of faces. Then she began. 3 days ago, I boarded a Skybridge Airlines flight. I held a first-class ticket purchased under my own name and paid for by my own company. Her voice was clear, steady. I was told that my seat had been reassigned, without warning, without justification, and without apology. The room remained silent, but the tension curled around every listener. Evelyn continued. I was asked to sit further back in the plane. A white man took the seat I had paid for. He was not questioned. He was not asked for credentials. He was not delayed. She paused for a breath. I was. Reporters shifted in their chairs, pens scribbling furiously. For some, this may sound like an unfortunate mistake, but for many of us, it is a familiar pattern. Her voice dropped lower now, almost like a whisper, but no less powerful. A pattern where our worth must always be proven, where we are told, in small ways and large ones, that we do not belong, not in boardrooms, not in first class, not in power. She leaned forward slightly. But I'm here to tell you that we do belong. We always have, and we no longer need to ask permission. There was no applause yet. No one dared break the moment. Evelyn looked across the crowd. I did not raise my voice. I did not cause a scene. I did not retaliate with anger. She paused. Instead, I reminded them who I am and who I represent. She tapped the table once, slowly. I represent the daughters who watch their mothers walk away from opportunities they deserved, the passengers who were overlooked, the interns who were silenced, the professionals who were told to wait their turn while someone else boarded ahead. A small murmur rippled through the crowd. Evelyn raised her chin. I own part of that airline. I helped fund the aircraft I was removed from, and I will not be silent when my presence is treated as a problem. Her voice tightened just slightly with emotion. Since that day, I have received letters, emails, calls, messages from people I will never meet who have been through the same humiliation. Quiet, casual, cruel. She opened a folder on the table and pulled out a single sheet of paper. This is a letter from an 11-year-old girl who watched the live stream from that flight. She wrote, I didn't know people could stand up without yelling. I didn't know someone like me could win by staying calm." Evelyn looked directly into the cameras now. I want her to know, yes, she can. And for the first time, someone in the back clapped, then another, and another. It grew slowly, not loud, not explosive, but real. Evelyn waited for the applause to quiet before she continued. "To Skybridge Airlines. I have this to say: you will not fix this with a press release. You will not fix it with an internal email or a vague apology." She glanced down at her notes, then folded them away. "This is not a PR issue. This is a values issue." A long pause, and values must be enforced at the top. She nodded once, then continued. "Effective immediately. Solaris Equity Group will be forming a permanent oversight committee to monitor equity compliance across all airlines we invest in." A slide appeared on the screen behind her, listing the names of 6 people including herself, Layla Bryant, and a retired flight attendant of color who had once sued an airline for harassment and lost. Every complaint, every report, every instance of biased treatment will be tracked, investigated, and publicly disclosed. The crowd murmured again. And to the crew members involved in the incident, those who stood silent, those who followed along, and those who looked away, I hope this teaches something far more valuable than fear. I hope it teaches responsibility. She closed her folder. We do not raise the standard through punishment alone. We raise it by expectation, by action, and by example. The room erupted into a standing ovation, not because it was rehearsed, but because it was overdue. Afterward, Evelyn stepped off the stage without another word. Outside the building, cameras continued to flash. She didn't stop for interviews. She didn't need to. Everything she had to say had already been said, and for once, it had been heard. That night, news stations across the country played clips of her speech. Talk shows debated the impact. Aviation boards scrambled to review their training. CEOs drafted memos that sounded suspiciously like hers. And on social media, the final clip that went most viral wasn't her speech. It was a moment captured quietly by Kendrick Hale from the back of the press room. Evelyn, walking out into the sunlight, greeted by a little black girl holding a toy airplane. She knelt down, smiled, and handed the girl a small pin that read, "You belong here." The moment was only 5 seconds long, but those 5 seconds said everything. The aftermath always moves differently. Slower, deeper, and strangely quieter. After the headlines fade and the algorithms chase the next spark, what remains are the people who saw everything, those who watched in silence, unsure of what to say, afraid to say it, or wishing they had said more, and some of them still carried that silence like a stone. Layla Bryant walked slowly through the now familiar Solaris offices. The halls smelled like cedar and clean air, nothing like the recycled tension of her old internship at Skybridge, but she still carried a little of that tension in her shoulders. She couldn't stop replaying the moment on the plane when Evelyn had walked past her row. How she hadn't stood up, hadn't said anything, had only watched. Now she was part of something larger, yes. But that quiet ache still sat in her chest like a bruise that hadn't faded. Evelyn had noticed. And on this afternoon, she called Layla into her office, not for a meeting, just tea. The two women sat across from each other, mugs in hand, steam curling between them. "I should have done more," Layla said before the tea had even cooled. Evelyn didn't respond right away. Instead, she let the silence stretch. Then finally, she said, "You think courage always shows up in the moment, but sometimes it waits. And when it does, it tests whether you're willing to carry that regret forward and turn it into something real." Layla blinked. I froze, and then you moved. Evelyn replied, "You stayed. You listened. You reached out. You followed through." Layla looked down. "Do you still think about what they said to you?" Evelyn took a breath. "I think about what they didn't say more." Layla tilted her head. "What do you mean?" Evelyn leaned back in her chair, her voice growing quieter. "I've sat in so many rooms where people saw things and said nothing. And not just strangers, colleagues, peers, sometimes people who claim to be allies." She took a sip from her mug. "They never say, 'You don't belong.' They just let the systems do it for them." Layla nodded slowly. "But what if you become one of those people without meaning to?" Evelyn looked her in the eye. "You're asking the right questions. That's the beginning." Layla exhaled, and for the first time in days, she felt like the bruise in her chest had softened. Across town, Raquel Damas sat on the edge of her bed, still in partial uniform, even though she hadn't been scheduled in 2 days. Her phone buzzed endlessly with messages, some from former co-workers, a few from passengers, one, surprisingly, from a woman she didn't know, someone who had seen her face in a clip and asked if she was okay. Raquel hadn't responded to any of them. She hadn't even unpacked her overnight bag. The note from HR sat unopened on her dresser. She didn't need to read it. She already knew what it said. What haunted her wasn't the termination. It was the fact that she had done so little when it had mattered most. She hadn't spoken up, hadn't questioned Marcus, hadn't stood between Evelyn and the insult. She had just done her job, followed the rules, looked away. Raquel picked up her phone, opened a new message, typed, then deleted. Typed again, then hit send. The message was simple: "I'm sorry. I saw it. I let it happen. I wish I hadn't." She didn't know if Evelyn would respond. She didn't even know if the number was correct, but she needed to say it. And that mattered. Not far from her, Tyler Ross sat at a small cafe table downtown, a newspaper folded in half beside him. He was reading slowly, like each paragraph might offer him redemption. He had watched himself in one of the viral clips. The moment Evelyn stood beside her reassigned seat while he remained sitting, he hadn't asked questions. He hadn't looked up. He had simply taken what was handed to him, because that's how the world had always worked for him. And now, he wasn't sure what kind of person that made him. He finished his coffee, wrote something on a napkin, then left it with a generous tip. The note read, "She deserved better. So do all of you. Start asking why." Meanwhile, Kendrick Hale now featured on major news outlets as the livestream kid had just gotten off a Zoom call with a university journalism program offering him a scholarship. He stood on his apartment rooftop, phone still in his hand, wind teasing his hoodie. He thought about how different things could have been if he hadn't started filming, and how different they still could be if people like him didn't keep documenting what others ignored. He opened his TikTok app, set it to record, spoke into the lens. Sometimes the strongest person in the room is the one who doesn't speak until she's ready to change the room itself. He paused, then smiled slightly. And sometimes you're just the guy who hit record at the right moment. But that matters too. He ended the video, posted it, then looked out over the city, the skyline holding more meaning now than it ever had before, because watching is not a passive act, not anymore. and for those who had watched Evelyn Cross be dismissed, disregarded, and then rise, they were not the same. They couldn't be. Not after what they saw. Not after who they saw. The invitation was simple. An embossed card. No logos, no titles, just a location, a time, and 2 words at the bottom, "You're invited." The address was familiar to aviation insiders, Hangar 6A, a rarely used section of JFK International, mostly reserved for private events and retired aircraft. But tonight, it held something new, and something historic. As Evelyn Cross stepped out of her vehicle, the evening air wrapped gently around her shoulders. She wore a long black coat over a deep emerald blouse. No entourage, no flashing press, just her, and the future she came to meet, inside the hangar. The crowd gathered in silence. Executives from rival airlines, flight attendants from multiple carriers, wearing pins of solidarity, pilots in uniform, interns in borrowed suits, and scattered throughout the room dozens of people who had once been told, in ways both blunt and subtle, that they did not belong in the air. Tonight, that changed. The lights dimmed. A screen illuminated the far wall. A single video played, not slick or rehearsed. It showed a child, a little girl with dark curls, holding a toy airplane, standing in front of her grandmother's living room couch. "I want to be a captain," she said softly to the camera, because captains don't ask people to move seats. They welcome them. The screen faded to black. No applause, just stillness. Then Evelyn stepped to the stage. No teleprompter, no notes, only a microphone, and a room filled with people leaning forward. She looked out at them and began. "We've gathered tonight not to revisit what happened, but to create what comes next." Her voice carried gently, like wind lifting a kite. For decades, air travel has connected the world. But it has not always welcomed all of the world equally. She paused, letting that land. Some of us have walked down jet bridges only to be sent backward. Some have paid for seats we were told we did not earn. Some have stood at gates that seemed built to keep us out. Heads nodded around the room, but not anymore. A soft hum of agreement rose. Evelyn continued. "Today, we launch the Ford Standard." A panel behind her slid open, revealing a model aircraft fuselage full-size, gleaming, not with a corporate logo, but with 3 simple words painted along its side: dignity, access, accountability. Murmurs grew louder now. Eyes widened, phones came out, but no one spoke above a whisper, because this wasn't a stunt, it was a shift. The Ford Standard, Evelyn explained, will be adopted by every airline receiving equity funding from Solaris. It includes mandatory training, not just in diversity, but in active equity implementation. She gestured to the screen as slides began to cycle policies, timelines, a hotline monitored by a third party, protections for passengers and crew. This isn't about checking boxes. It's about rewriting the boarding process itself. A woman near the front wiped tears from her cheeks, and for those who say this is too expensive, too complicated, too much, Evelyn paused and smiled. I say the cost of not doing it is far higher. Applause broke, not chaotic, not forced. It was like rain after drought, cleansing, needed, real, later. As the crowd mingled, Layla Bryant stood near one of the displays, talking with a regional airline CEO who had flown in from Texas just for the launch. Kendrick Hale wandered past, camera in hand, already drafting captions in his mind. Raquel Demas stood quietly in the back, not as an employee, not as a headline, but as a woman who wanted to begin again. She had come on her own. No one had asked her to, and when Evelyn saw her, she walked straight over. No cameras followed, no crowd gathered, just the two of them. Face to face, Raquel's voice cracked slightly. "I was wrong." Evelyn nodded. "You were silent." Raquel swallowed hard. "But I'm listening now." They stood there a moment. Then Evelyn placed a pin in her hand. It was small, circular, with an open gate design at the center. Raquel held it like it might break. "Thank you," she whispered. "You're welcome," Evelyn replied. "Now go make sure no one else gets left behind." Outside, the evening wind picked up. Planes still took off overhead. People still boarded and landed, not knowing that something beneath their feet had shifted. A girl in a faded flight attendant costume clutched her mother's hand near the hangar door. "Mom," she said, "can I be the person who says welcome instead of go back?" Her mother nodded. "You already are." And inside, Evelyn Cross looked out at the people now standing taller, speaking louder, daring to imagine a different kind of sky. Because sometimes justice doesn't roar. It boards quietly, takes its seat, and changes the course of flight. Evelyn Cross never raised her voice, but she raised the standard. She didn't demand pity. She demanded accountability. Her calmness was not weakness. It was legacy. It was history, standing tall in an aisle too narrow for justice until she widened it with grace. And while one flight crew was removed, a new standard of human dignity was boarded. Because no one, no matter their color, status, or silence, should be told they don't belong. Not in business class, not in first class, not anywhere. So, as you leave this story behind, ask yourself, where are the moments you stayed seated when someone else was pushed back? And what will you do the next time you see it happen again? Because the world doesn't just need louder voices. It needs clearer ones, kinder ones, braver ones. Thank you for joining us on this journey. If this story moved you, if it opened something in you, please like, share, and subscribe to the channel. There are more stories ahead, and together, we're saving a seat for everyone. See you on the next flight.